Apamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at apamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
How are you holding up? It's a lot of integrated intensive because our regular lives are busy enough, right? When you add on these extra sessions, it's quite something. And usually by the middle of the week, we're wearing out our stories, and that makes it even more tedious. You know? So I'll explain. The main purpose of tonight's activity is to give people a little practice playing with how you might express yourself from one of these levels, and how a person who is doing orientation might respond to the questions that are asked by someone from that level. So there are 3 roles, and you'll be in groups of 3, and you can go in separate parts of the house, so you have a little bit more quiet. And so these 3 roles are, first of all, is the orientation leader. And this is someone who's going to be offering orientation to the newcomer. So don't worry if you don't know what we actually do in orientation or can't remember the details. You're just going to start off by saying a little something about Appamada, try to see if you, whatever you manage to know, and then try to see if you can understand what level of grave stages the newcomer is coming from. Try to answer questions that are directed to that level, the answers, right? So that's you're guessing. So meanwhile, the newcomer has come to orientation without knowing anything about Appamada, and they are going to decide in advance what level of grave stages, you know, purple, red, blue, green, and so forth, you want to represent. Don't tell anybody, you know. So you're going to decide your newcomer coming in with green level set of values. So what kinds of questions would you ask if you were coming in with a green level set of values, right? What would you ask if you were coming in with a blue level set of values? So think about what would your questions be coming from that set of values. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then the orientation leader is going to try and figure out, based on what your questions are, where you're coming from, and try to meet you at that level. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. There's just a little practice with this, you know? And then there's an observer role where you're observing the orientation, you offer support for the presenter, and like they forget what the name of our center is or something, you know. And try to determine, along with the presenter, which level the newcomer is thinking from. You might even suggest possible ways to connect with someone thinking at that level. So you could say to the orientation leader, well, you might explain our potlucks, you know, this green level thing. You might explain your potlucks. If you discern that, you know, if you think that, and the person who's the orientation leader is sort of at sea about it. It's not intended to be arduous, you know, it's just a little practice. And can I determine by the questions this person's asking, where are they asking from? If they're asking about what are the rules here, who's in charge, you know, how does this work, then you have a certain idea, right? And almost invariably in any conversation, you'll pretty quickly see what level these questions are coming from. Okay, so after about 5 minutes, take 2 minutes to see whether the observer and the orientation leader correctly guessed the newcomer's stage. And then, did the answers provided by the orientation leader meet the person at that stage? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's just a little calibrated practice, just a little, you know. So try to, if you're going to be the second person, not take the same level, obviously, you know, but decide one of the levels that you would be coming from. Just switch roles, you know, so each person has a chance to have each of these roles. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. Understandable? Mm-hmm. You have a question?
I don't get the timing of it yet.
5 minutes.
For each role of 3 role plays?
Yeah, so that's like 15 minutes total for that. But there's a couple minutes in between where you sort of debrief in a way, you know, like, yeah, no, I was coming from green and all your answers were really for blue level, you know, so so that you can kind of check it out, right?
Okay, but we're sort of assessing what level they're coming from their questions, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You're only trying to determine from their questions.
Okay.
So, and they're trying to ask questions that would be coming from that value system. So, are people really friendly here? Is it inclusive? Like now you're starting to get an idea of a level, right? Or somebody says, well, I like to be kind of in and out, and I'm also practicing over Chamba, and I'm also, like, I have another yoga class, and it's attached to, so you're starting to think, oh, okay, now we're talking to a yellow level person, right? So you're discerning that as the orientation leader, what are we dealing with? And then you're responding to those particular questions.
So I have a question, Peg. So to get the newcomer speaking first, because usually you say, welcome to Appamata, blah, blah, blah. So you would maybe ask them, ask them a question so that you can get a read on them, because usually the leader's talking first.
The leader is going to talk first and say just a little bit about Appamata, and then say, do you have any questions?
And that's how you get it. Okay, got it now.
And then the person's going to have questions, right?
So my second question is, does the observer say these things right in front of the newcomer? It's like,
Yes.
They're just.
But the appropriate way that you would in front of a newcomer. So, you might tell her about our potlucks,
Got it.
like that, so sort of like an assistant in a way.
Got it.
Because sometimes a person may be, sort of struggling to figure out what's going on, And so the observer might recognize, they're coming from green level. We're going to tell them about film night, or something like that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do this in groups of 3. Ultimately, it's going to end up taking probably a total maybe 25 minutes or so, something like that, maybe half an hour, just to get yourself settled and, and hopefully you have a copy of the levels in case you can't remember what the cues are. But I thought it would give us a little chance to just like experientially work with these stages in a way that we might actually be doing if we were leading orientation, or if we were, listening to questions in a group and trying to determine, this person's going to be really worried about the rules and procedures and policies, so we can respond in that way, right? So it's just to give us a little chance to play these out and feel sort of in an embodied way. What does it feel like to be coming from blue or to be coming from green? What would your questions be? Does it make sense? Yeah. And so then we'll come back, and we'll discuss what you discovered, because it's an experiment, so you may have real difficulty trying to figure out where they're coming from, and that's okay too, because that might happen sometimes, so so then after each person, you're going to debrief for a couple of minutes and see, I was coming from green, but all of these answers seem to be blue level answers, or see if you can make a connection to the person coming from that level. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So we'll count off.
I think being here a lot. Change levels.
Change level for you.
I do.
I think it's some combination of meditation, the connections with other people and other ideas and other ways of being, and then also just the study that we do, getting a different set of principles than at least I grew up with. So that's been most helpful for me. So, and you can kind of get a clue when you see that these stages are linked to certain environmental conditions, right? Mm-hmm. So change the environment. You sometimes give people capacity to make an appropriate change, or help them understand that the environment is not what they think it is. So a lot of people come into this environment imagining that they're going to be criticized, or people are going to be judging them, or that's a really painful position to be in. Hopefully if they stick around the end, that's not true, but that's my thought about it. I think they're just finishing up in there. So a couple more minutes. But what did you think generally about the activity?
It's fun.
Yeah. Just imagining your way into that other way of thinking.
Yeah, we, because there was just two of us, we'd done a few rounds, and then what really helped both of us was, I said, what brought you to Agawam in the first place? And then when she told her story, I could pick it out, and then when I told my story, I was hearing myself in the levels and just telling my story, it was interesting. That's a good way to practice too, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, role-playing is one of my favorite pedagogical methods because you're not as vulnerable if you're representing yourself. You're representing a role.
Yeah.
And with my students, it was the fastest way they learned anything, and much more sort of subtle and sophisticated aspects of what they were learning.
Yeah, it was a really good role play too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was fun. Yeah.
You know, so background about this role play activity. When I was at a conference, I heard a presenter who was giving a meta-analysis of about 500 research studies in the teaching of writing. And he said, so I'm going to tell you what works. You know, so he actually wrote an article, what works in teaching writing. And so he was talking about these 500 ways of, doing research on how people teach writing and what really works. And he said, so we put that all into the article, but there was one study that had such vastly superior results to every other study that we looked at that we just set it aside because it was going to skew all the data. And I said, I beg your pardon, and it was a study by a community college teacher, and what she did was role plays. So she would give students a little capsule, maybe summary. Then they would all have resources that they could refer to, and they would start role playing position. So when I did this in my class, for example, they were just starting to talk about replacing textbooks with laptops. And so the first thing I did was a survey of my students, these undergraduate students, what they thought about this idea. It was all pro or con, like I'm against it or I'm in favor of it. It was all black and white. So then I gave them in groups of 3 a persona. So you are a Spanish speaker who doesn't speak any English at all. And you're gonna be, weighing in on this question, laptops or textbooks? You are a textbook publisher. You are the tech guy in a school campus who's going to be responsible for all of this equipment. You are a mom with 3 kids. You're a single mom. You're working. Your kids are with their grandmother during the day. So they had and they had to create websites for their persona. And so what their hobbies were, where they lived, the Spanish speakers, the group that was supposed to be all Spanish speaking, they said they were so creative. They said, we have found a Spanish-English translation device online and we can now participate. So, which there wasn't such a thing at that time. And so then they had these, so then they read everybody's, initial papers about their opinions, which were extremely cliched. Then, so then they created these websites, and then I put them in an online real-time discussion. And they're going back and forth and just saying, oh yeah, but Jeff is blind. What are we gonna do to help Jeff if Jeff doesn't, if can't have a Braille textbook, And so when they came back with their final essays, they were the most nuanced, sophisticated papers I have ever gotten. They said, we have to consider students with disabilities. We have to think about what the implications are for non-native speakers. None of those things were in their heads, right? Until they really, were discussing with each other. We had classroom discussions about it. And the textbook publisher is like, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm just going to go out of business, And the high school tech guy is going, I'm gonna be responsible for 400
Laptops.
400 laptops that kids are taking home and eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches over? Seriously? You know, how am I gonna keep everything running? And, you know, their little sisters and brothers are gonna be bashing these computers. So it was really funny. The discussions were really lively because they were coming from these roles. And so I really learned an important lesson about how role-playing can really bring some things alive that otherwise are just abstract concepts, you know, you have an opinion about, but you haven't really ever really wrestled with what it's like for a real person. So anyway, so that's how I got really enchanted with role-playing as an experiential way of learning. So anyway, so your reports, what happened to you?
Well, I want to say that I was really impressed. I was with Daniel and Darcy always steered it back to acknowledging the person who was the newcomer, and and really making the newcomer feel welcome. I thought that was a key thing for me. I wanted to do this on me. She was like, let's talk to the person.
Did you have trouble figuring out what the levels were? It's not always super obvious, right? Yes. So,
Nor is it one level or the other. We kept getting hints, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
yeah. So what you'll find is there's an orange level person who's still got a foot back in blue, a orange level person who's sort of moving towards green, and that's what happens in real life, We'll talk about that tomorrow.
Well, I thought that it was likely that a new person's concerns would not necessarily reflect where they were as much as what their experience had been in the past. In other words, if they've had a red level experience with religion in childhood, they're going to be leery of certain things that aren't representative
Yeah,
of
that's
their thought process.
right. That's a good point. Yeah, they might be really conditioned by some other experiences. Yeah. Any folks online, you want any thoughts or reflections about this? What happened in your groups?
Oh, I think we struggled a bit with absorbing the morning. First time I think for the three of us to hear this, but we role played twice, and both times we did figure out what the newcomer, where they were kind of coming from, and I think we tailored it a bit. What I like about the approach, there's a bunch of things, but it's focusing, like as a presenter, I'm typically thinking about myself. And so if I'm really looking for, where this person's coming from, and having this structure might or might not help. I know it's too new for me. But just that alone is really helpful, just to have that. It's really an empathic stance to really, in this exercise that you're giving us.
Yeah, that's the effort, and that's one of the overall benefits, I think, of this particular model, is that it really builds empathy. You really get curious about, of course it would look that way, I can see from your perspective how it would look like that. There's a kind of generosity in that, right? It's not even saying you have to agree with that perspective, but you really can see from that perspective. So, yeah, people who are terrified of making mistakes, and you think, you can make mistakes here, nobody's gonna criticize you or judge you or blame you.
There was also a request for have more about the fourth column in future days here.
About the community part?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about that a little more when we talk about the belonging piece, and I'm gonna, on Friday, I'll sort of give a consolidated view, and maybe that'll bring things together a little bit. But it was so provocative when I first encountered it, you know. I was so captivated by how careful Graves was to not use this as a way of categorizing people, but really to help us see, oh, people organize their values in different ways, and you can learn that. You know, it's characteristic. And the results are pretty robust. I mean, they've continued these studies. Natasha and Chris Cowan, who has since died, they had an online kind of assessment tool. So you could see. And it's very nuanced because it'll say, for example, there's a baseline and you have much stronger preference for green, for example, much lower tolerance for red. Or, you know, it'll show you literally on a map, you know. So, and where your own sort of tendencies in holding your values lie. So it's nuanced. It's not, you know, you have, you know, like you have predominantly yellow and then quite a bit of green, for example. And that is helpful, right? Because you see, oh yeah, all of that transcendent include is really true. You know, all of those levels are still present, and in varying degrees. So, yeah.
I think what I'm realizing is that, I mean, it's one thing to ascertain sort of what level the person is operating with. But what's even harder is for me to respond at that level if
Yes.
if I'm thinking that person would be better off aspiring to another one.
This is what Kim was saying. How do we move them to another level? You know, like, no, you're stuck there. Let me help you.
I just want to say, I can quote that when we were, Leslie did a great job when she was, Nate was coming across as red, you know, and so it was like, and I forget how you put it, but it was like, you know, you've heard about people getting hit with sticks and
Yeah.
stuff, you know, like that might be a good thing. I'd be drawn to that.
And there are people who are, by
And
the way.
Leslie, no, and Leslie just immediately pivoted away from just being really warm and welcoming to, and not to being anything inauthentic to Appamata, but saying, you know, there is rigor though, and there's challenge, you know, you work with the teacher and they hold you accountable. And so I felt like it was not, you know, misrepresenting Appamata at all.
No, but it was speaking to that level.
Speaking to the things that would appeal to, like, we don't hit people with sticks, but we do.
She will be able to.
And she did it on a dime, you know, she just like, so I admired that, that was really great. It was great to see it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
So, I mean, I think I guess I'm saying, you know, like, I can't relate to this, you know, it's like there's, you know, it's really just kind of speaking to as best we're able, given who we are.
We're just providing a bridge, you know, we're providing a bridge between the wisdom teachings of the Buddha and the practices that we know to be beneficial and where the person is, you know. And this is one way to think about where the person is, which has been super helpful to me.
To what extent do you think of these as situational? Meaning that your value structures, even if you are yellow as a default, that a situation calls for X?
Well, your response to the environment includes the potential for all of the levels below the level you're at. So if the level requires strength and power, you have that capacity. You know, if it requires following the rules and knowing your place in that hierarchy, you can do that. You may not prefer it. It's not your preference, but you can do it. But if you're a blue level thinker, you can't do yellow. You can't do orange. You can't get there from here, right? And you can't understand the people who are coming from that place. So you're at a kind of a loss, you know, when the circumstances are, you know, like, it's like, imagine a Navy SEAL at a yoga retreat.
Yeah.
You know, like fish in a tree, right? They cannot get their mind into that frame,
Right.
right? So that's the difficulty, and that is the only reason that higher levels are more beneficial, because that includes more possibilities for meeting a particular environment. And so I think it all comes down to, for me, it all comes down to response flexibility. So it's not so much that it's situational as that you recognize, oh, in this environment, I need to be really mindful of the rules, you know. Now I'm a police officer by the car window, you know, so I'm not doing green level thinking, you know, like I'm gonna have to follow the rules, right? So it's so that is the successful adaptation, right, to the circumstances that you find yourself in, the environment you find yourself in. And the problem is, you know, people will insist on their value structures when they're in an environment that doesn't match very well. And then that's when there's trouble, you know, strife and struggle. Yeah. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, Trish?
I think this is also a good exercise in terms of looking at orientation, because, and I'm not an experienced orientation giver, but you know, you think, okay, orientation, you want to deliver content, and this really helps me to see the most important thing is not the content. The most important thing is being flexible, having enough content through your own experience to deliver based on what you're seeing over there.
That's right. The most important thing is the connection.
Yeah.
And you're connecting not so that you can deliver content. You're connecting so that the person is encouraged and invited to come and explore the content. So, yeah. I was trying to think, while you guys were working, I was trying to think, what are classic questions that would come from each of the levels? You know, like classic purple level, do you use mantras? You know, do you have a connection to the Native American community? You know, it would be something like that. Classic red level, I thought, who's in charge here? Do you have a connection to the Longhorns? Any sports teams, archery? You know, do you do martial arts here? Because, you know, martial arts, you know, really originated there in Shaolin Temple from the Zen monks. So, yeah, classic blue level questions. So what are the forms and the rules here? Do you have a board? How are decisions made? What are the roles, right? Classic orange level. How many members do you have? Do you have a connection to the business community? You know, be that kind of thing, you know, like sometimes people will ask to see the annual report, you know. And you're thinking, oh, I know exactly where we are here. Classic green questions, do you have a diversity program? Do you have volunteer opportunities? Do you have a connection to the interfaith community? You know, would be like that. Classic yellow questions, do I have to join something? I'd love to help out on workday, but I can't really commit to being here consistently. Is that okay? You know, I'm not really looking for connections, but do you really have sanghas in England and in Switzerland? Yeah. I think the classic turquoise questions are just like, what is this? Are you here now too? So those were the ones that I was thinking. Anyway, but who knows what would come up. And, you know, it's not to be hidebound about it. I mean, there's not really a, you know, strict definition, but as you saw in your groups, it might come in, all these questions might come in different forms, you know. And people themselves might be a little bit confused about where they're coming from. They might be a little confused about why they're here, you know. But if you understand, oh, my job is to connect, figure out what they're looking for, what their values are, help them see whether those values exist here, you know, and how we can support them, you know. And so the rest, you know, all the background about Apamata, Sunday morning program, you know, Dharma talks, all of that is fine, and they're going to get all of that. But the main thing is, and so many people, they have said to me over and over and over again, I was in orientation and Joel was there and he was so kind. That's why I came back. That's why I came back. It's been, over and over again, people have told me about the people they've met in orientation who brought them back because that connection was so warm. So that's the main thing. Yeah. Yes.
So Peg, I was thinking about, sometimes I've been at many, many, many orientations and mostly as a monitor. And you do get some questions, but I'm thinking that there are some people that don't know what they want to ask. And there might be a good exercise to think about what questions we might have that could draw out
Right.
where they're at in this game,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What's most important to you about this? I think and I think that's another thing about this kind of little exercise is you start to think, well, what questions would I ask to discover, sort of to discover where they are. Yeah. So that's a really good point, Rosemary. It does sort of provoke this question in your own mind. How do I draw this forward so I have a little bit better picture? So yeah. Anyway, this isn't intended to be, a structure that we should use in orientation or anything like that. It's just a way to play with these levels and see, when you're talking to someone, very often, in general conversation, it becomes clear to you, what their values are organized around, So, as I said, everybody that you ask might say that their value is family, but family in a green level way is very different from ideas of family in a blue level way or in a yellow level way. So the content might be the same, but the way it's held is very different. Yeah, red level. No, that's just my bias. Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks for, engaging in this. And for me, it was just a way to make the material a little bit more real, a little bit more.
Came to life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a little bit less abstract, a little bit more connected. And tomorrow we'll talk about the change process. We'll talk about what happens, what it looks like. Claire Graves actually saw in the essays themselves the evidence that a person was exiting blue and entering orange, for example, or that they were just on the brink of exiting orange and going towards green, And it's very interesting because he has excerpts. There are excerpts from those essays in there, and you read them and you go, oh yeah, yeah. Here's a person who's saying a psychologically healthy, mature human being abides by the 10 Commandments and thinks for himself. And there's a person who's on his way to orange, right? He's just on his way to orange from blue. So it's very interesting in the book how you can see in those little, and you think, man, he looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of essays trying to figure out what is going on here, what is going on here. Why is this one with the 10 Commandments in it, so similar to the one with the guy who just got out of the Navy? Why are these similar? Yeah. So anyway, all right. Let's have a little.